right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focus where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Today, there is so much talk about Gen Z and the next generation and what they're like and what they need and what's happening as they enter the workforce. And it's always entertaining to me about how many of these conversations are based on industry reports and things like that. And so I thought, you know what, rather than just operate off assumptions and stereotypes, why not actually have a conversation with somebody who's living in the center of this? So today I'm joined by Ayush Prakash, and you're the host of the Gen Z Diplomat. We've actually been on a podcast together. I joined your podcast to talk about AI. And so, yes, we'll be talking about technology, but we're also just going to be talking about, well, a whole lot of things related to Gen Z. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. Every conversation we have is like one of my favorites because we just have these deep, thoughtful conversations on really important stuff. So, but for those who may not have had the privilege, like I have, to get to know you more outside this conversation, give folks a little bit of background into who you are and really also what you're trying to accomplish through, at least what I know through the work you're doing with the Gen Z Diplomat.
Sure. So, yeah, as you said, I'm 22. I'm a Gen Z living in Montreal. I think the genesis of my career was career because I'm 22. But when I published a book about artificial intelligence for Gen Z in my third year of university, and that's not really a brag, but the reason I did it in that aggressive, no strings attached way is because I felt like, well, as I was researching artificial intelligence, not for my degree, I graduated in philosophy in Toronto, but as I was researching artificial intelligence, I realized that most of the books, most of the articles, most of the podcasts were not really communicating anything to my generation. And I'm
Okay.
thinking, Gen Z, the so-called digital natives, are undiscussed when thinking about how artificial intelligence is going to impact future careers and lifestyles. That's a massive gap.
Yeah.
And so I started writing and I started reading and consuming with a filter of this is how artificial intelligence is. How is this going to impact my generation? And that's kind of where the book, you know, sprung out of, where I
Okay.
was just like, okay, let me just assimilate, contextualize, and you know, uh, reformat all of this information for my generation. Because when they complain that they're not prepared, which they inevitably will do, I can say, look, I did it for you guys. I
Yeah.
assembled this, basket of ideas and information in a Gen Z format so you guys can all, get on that on ramp together. There's no excuse for it. You can't just blame the baby boomers or the millennials for not giving you the information or the time or the
Yeah.
resources. Your generation did that for you. So now there's no excuse and you have to take that, you have to go on the highway.
Which I love that you did that. And I remember even when we first met, that was a shared kind of, it's how my podcast started. Was there were a lot of people in my industry who were struggling to understand all this stuff. And so I took a similar approach of going, well, I'll be that voice then that assimilates and breaks that down. I am curious though, as you look at this from your generation's perspective, because I will tell you, the number of conversations where I think, and I'm curious your perspective on how those assumptions have affected your generation. Because I will say there are so many assumptions made about Gen Z. Like you said, oh, they're digital natives. And I think the problem with that is it's left a lot of, I don't know how you would, a lot of other generations, kind of the leaders who are leading this stuff, just assuming
Mhm.
Gen Z already has it all figured out. They already know all this stuff. So we don't have to tell them. We don't have to guide them. They know more than we do. So we're just going to kind of leave them alone. And I have to imagine, one, confirm if I'm correct, if that's kind of been your experience, because I see it all the time where it's like, oh yeah, we don't have to guide them on it. They know all this stuff. And I'm like, I I think that's a wrong assumption to make, but I'm curious your perspective and then the impact that has.
Yeah. No, I mean, most people think that competency with technology supersedes our ability to be controlled by technology. And I think this is a fundamental, misunderstanding. A lot of Gen Z are, very versed in how social media works, how their iPhone works. I'm pretty sure a lot
Yeah.
of Gen Z and some Zillennials, the intersection between millennials and Gen Z, are the techies in their family. And that's for a reason. It's because they grew up with technology. Like their brain was literally molded around social media and how technology works. Um, and so they understand it at a more concrete level because, that was their environment in a literal sense. But yeah, some of the assumptions definitely have to do with this, push and pull between competency and being controlled by technology. I think a lot
Okay.
of folks think that Gen Z are controlled by technology and just leave it at that. And are not really
Mhm.
communicating that the generation, like for example, if someone has a drug problem, you're gonna have an intervention and say, look, this is not working out, your lifestyle is being
Yeah.
affected, we're all suffering the consequences. But why are we not doing this for the digital heroin or the electric cocaine that is TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and Netflix? For example, like Netflix, I think the Netflix CEO, but let's just say someone from Netflix said that their biggest competitor is sleep. And so
Huh.
if we're in this
So we know it.
right, like if we're in this age where we know that these platforms are harvesting our attention, among other things, our user data, our personal information, why are we not sitting down with young folks who are immature? Let's just face it, they're not going to handle these digital substances, but substances nonetheless, in healthy and mature ways. In the same way that a young person, the first time they consume alcohol, is probably going to go overboard because they've
Yeah.
never interacted with the substance. They've never consumed it before. So they don't know what the ramifications for the next day are. They don't know what the long
Right.
term consequences are. And so I think we need to have a similar approach with technology where we can't just assume that because Gen Z are able to, change the settings on your iPhone faster than you are, that they're just like I guess that they're numb to the effects of social media and technology in general. I still think we need to look at them and say, look, guys, you're young, you're going to be interacting with these technologies in some form for the rest of your lives. It's going to get more and more integrated into your daily life. We're going from a frictiony iPhone to VR
Yeah.
goggles. Next thing you know, Neuralink is going to be in your head, replacing your eyes. And it's like we need to instill these good, healthy habits beforehand and not just,
Yeah.
again, using your words, like assume that they're going to figure it out.
Well, and what's interesting is you talk about this. As I was thinking about, I told you backstage, I spent a lot of time studying history and things like that. And one of the things that I think has made this challenging and maybe just uncomfortable for people is, with so many other things in life, like alcohol, like, other things, adults have gone through it first. So they feel more equipped
Mhm.
to have a discussion about it because even if things have changed, maybe culture has changed, maybe there are some differences. It's like, well, I went through this, so I at least have some experience. And anyways, when we look at it, I mean, I'm a dad. A
Mhm.
lot of what my kids do, they've learned because they've observed me do it, or they've learned because somehow they've seen me interact with that. And granted, even in those, and I think this is where we got to be careful, I would say we still don't even do that well a lot. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that, like, hey, I can think of a number of things that, maybe I've learned that I'm not always the best at communicating with my kids, like, hey, watch. And that's legacy stuff.
Sure.
But technology really threw a loop in the mix, or a wrench in the mix, because all of a sudden it was like, when your kid was showing you how to do things and you're like, I've never even
Mhm.
done
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
it suddenly creates a new challenge because you're like, how do I disciple someone in something that I've never experienced? And they're clearly, to your point, more acute to how it works. And that can lead to an assumption that, well, then you must understand all this other stuff. And it's like, well, no, they wouldn't, because they've never been discipled in how all those other pieces fit together. And so you're seeing it. So I can see where it creates really unique challenges.
Yeah. No, I 100% hear that and agree with you that it's difficult and frankly inappropriate for me to suggest that parents should discipline and educate their kids without the parents having, PhDs in technology, like without the parents understanding how the technology
Yeah.
works and what those um, social, psychological, physical, emotional, mental ramifications will be. For sure, 100%, I agree.
No, well, because we talked about this before when we were planning for this one. Like, this is where mistakes happen. Like, a
Mm,
parent sees their kid and goes, I'm taking away your phone.
yeah,
And they don't realize, hey, like that is their whole social ecosystem.
yeah,
And they don't realize what they're doing. So they're just like, well, it's no big deal. I just took your phone. You should be able to put that down. And they haven't
mhm.
taken the time to understand there's more to the fabric of what this is and how it's integrated into their life that you don't realize you're messing with. And when you do that with a wrecking ball, you may be inflicting far more harm than you realize.
Oh yeah. I mean, if we can just expand on that point. So
Yeah.
this phenomenon of taking the phone away is fascinating, and it's a simple solution to a very complex problem, because what most people don't realize is that, again, your digital device, your phone, your laptop, your watch, increasingly now your VR or XR headset is your portal into the social digital realm. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm on Instagram and we have group chats on Instagram, friends send memes and photos and videos to each other. That doesn't just exist in a vacuum. And that's what a lot of folks, particularly older folks, don't realize. It's that,
Yeah.
though it's not just a method of communication, it's also a method of connection, albeit digital
Yep.
connection, but that transcends into physical reality. So the jokes and the memes and all of those, messages that are shared on social networks have an impact in the physical world. And so when
Yeah.
you're taking away someone's phone, you're actually giving or promoting this non-zero chance or this non-trivial possibility where a joke is shared on this group chat that your kid doesn't get because they just weren't there to consume it and to interact with it. And obviously we know the digital life of media, it's ephemeral. And so once that joke goes and your kid doesn't get it, now when they go back to class or they go back to hanging out with their friends in real life, they're not going to get the joke. And even more
Right.
so, what if the future jokes in that group chat are built off of that inside joke? Now they're the social outcasts. And all you did
Yeah.
was take away their phone for 10 minutes or an hour. But and that's the thing, is that we can't just think of technology as this binary thing of like either you have it or you don't, because it doesn't work like that anymore.
No, it doesn't. And what's interesting about that in particular is I have a lot of conversations and have been in many heated conversations because I have tried to help articulate the complexity of interpersonal relationships and how digital is actually a interwoven fabric of that.
Mhm,
And people tend to see it very binary. And again, depending on where the generation sits, there can be relationships can't exist in a digital format, or it's completely disconnected from that. And all these things you just described, I mean, I use as an example, I use Marco Polo all the time. It does not replace the live human interactions I have with people. However, it's very much a supplement to how I maintain relationships and keep up to date with things. If you just
mhm,
said, don't do that anymore, like you described, it would actually disrupt the fabric of the relationships I have with people. And there is a tendency to just say, well, because I never grew up with that or I never experienced it, it's not a real thing, or it's
mhm.
somehow, an artificial thing that we can just get rid of. And I'm very much in the camp of no, no, you actually can't. And or at least not without some serious consequences.
No, 100% agree. And I think one of the unfortunate themes of this conversation is that there are no easy answers. I
No,
think
there's not.
just touching back on the taking the phone away, One way to mitigate this is to take all the friends' phones away at the same time. But that requires a lot of coordination. It requires a lot of similar values in the community. And now this may be a call to reinstate, solid communities, to get closer to people. It may like this malfunction of technology in society may be a call to build our societies in different and better and more connected ways, for sure. But again, it's not like you can't solve these collective problems through just individual actions. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I mean, so on some of these things, because going back to it, I think there is a lot of complexity behind this.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of damage has been done when I think about the fact that when you look at the power of technology and what it can do, and I mean, I just know how frequently this is just handed to, again, youth. Like, here's a thing. Just go do a thing with it. And I'm not really going to guide you in that at all. And that's dangerous in any realm, not just technology, but technology especially. So now we're here where we are now, where it's like, well, we can't necessarily undo it. What
Mhm.
are you seeing, or how are you, like, when you engage with other folks in your generation who maybe didn't get that discipleship? Which to me, I see it's the difference between like knowledge and wisdom. You
Mhm.
maybe got the knowledge, you knew how to do it, you knew what to do with the tools and the tech, but you didn't really have the wisdom and discernment to know, hey, what are the implications of these decisions? How do I think about what are the long-term effects? So now we're there. How are you leaning in, or what are you seeing that's effective in helping? Because to your point, you can't just say get rid of your phone,
Yeah.
but to somebody who goes, I can't go 10 minutes without my phone, that's probably not a healthy life habit. What do you see works in breaking through some of that?
Oh, it's a multifaceted and layered question. I think, well, one of the things we have to realize, and this goes back to who Gen Z are as a generation,
Yeah.
digital natives doesn't just mean that they grew up at the same time as technology was, becoming more ubiquitous in society. It means that their brains are, looking back to neuroplasticity, your brain rewires itself according to its environment. And so if you're interacting with something on a daily basis that by, technically that becomes part of your environment. And so if
Yep.
this thing in your environment is like a portal into another world, then we have to think that Gen Z, their brains are molded literally around how technology works, around how social media works, around the dopamine stimulating, hijacking effects of social media, of Facebook, Instagram. Their attention spans are being rewired through TikTok's 6 to 15 second lifetime, and Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. So we have to consider all of these things when just thinking about Gen Z. They don't have the same minds as the millennials or the baby boomers. So we have to, they're kind of, and not to be radical, but they're kind of a different species altogether because it's the first time in history where our minds are changed by technology, by the internet specifically. Just for example, in 100 years, when people do studies of how humans were, affected by the internet and technology in general, they're going to look back at Gen Z because it was the first time where kids grew up with an iPad within arm's reach, with an Amazon
Yep.
Alexa within, their voice's reach.
Yep.
Um, yeah, no, it's
Do you think, I am curious your take on this, because this is
Mhm,
always my challenge is I see a lot of things where people point the finger, and not necessarily even in a negative way, but saying like Gen Z is this way. And I hate
mhm,
generational stereotypes because every person I talk to is a unique individual and they never quite fit the mold perfectly. There may be tendencies. But sometimes I think one of the challenges I see is you look at millennials, you look at boomers, you look at Gen Xers, they're in the fishbowl too.
mhm,
And it's always interesting how easy it is to see, oh, well, they're doing this. And I'm like, I see some of the patterns of behavior. around social media and some of this other stuff in non-Gen Zers that I go, you are just as sucked into the toxic pattern of behavior that you're condemning a certain generation for, going, how do we fix this in them? It's like, you literally are living your life based on what information you're consuming
Mm-hmm.
through a social media channel with no connection to the people around you whatsoever. And
Yeah.
yet you're being so condemning of the new generation that does this, but it's almost like they don't see it.
Yeah. No, it's like you're judging a generation for using social media too much through a report on social media. It's almost like it's very
Right.
similar to the George Carlin joke of, when you're driving, the person in front of you that's going too slow is annoying, and the person in front of you that's going too fast is crazy. So it's
Yeah.
always a problem with everybody else. Um, yeah, no, it's, when I talk to baby boomers and millennials, they say that Gen Z complains a lot. When I talk to my generation, they say they don't complain enough. I think it also has to do with what are they complaining about? If it's climate change, and also how are they complaining? That's a big thing.
Yeah.
It's like if you can use social media to complain, I think that's fine. That's you're just, using your freedom of speech. But what Gen Z are doing now, unfortunately, is that they're not just utilizing social media and they're not just utilizing their ability to complain, they're weaponizing it. And that is causing a lot of strife and a lot of, bad things to happen. Like throwing soup on paintings, I don't think is an adequate solution to voice these concerns. And so 100%. I agree with my generation that we should be complaining about the state of the world more, but we should also be utilizing our digital nativity to enact innovations on complaining. We should be
Yeah.
doing more in this space to, if we're upset about something, let's build those solutions. Let's not get annoyed that our brothers and our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers are not building those solutions. We have the tools, we have the capacity, we have ubiquitous and democratic access to technology and information.
Yeah.
And
Well,
this is
I'll
the
go for it.
thing that is not being it's not being communicated to my generation specifically, and we'll put some of the blame on older generations. It's that, well, you're complaining about them complaining. I think that older generations need to kind of, when a toddler is throwing a tantrum, you don't also throw a tantrum too. You kind of have to like sit back and say, look,
At least
it's
you're not supposed to. You do see
you're
it
not
happen
supposed to.
sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. Um, you're supposed to you look back and say that's how you're supposed to act when you're young. You're supposed to just freak out about things, and the world's ending. We're all going to perish soon. And then you're supposed to come with a calm and collective demeanor and say, look, that's not how it is. You have to look at things in a different way. You have to use your tools. You have these incredible traits, and you can build on these other traits, and you go from there. But if we're going to see Gen Z throwing tantrums, and our response is to throw bigger tantrums or to complain about them throwing tantrums, I don't think that we get anywhere. It's
Yeah.
not to not blame my generation. I think that they need to kind of reorient themselves 100%. But we also need to continuously tell them and remind them, positive feedback. You guys need to stop complaining. You guys have the tools and skills necessary. Go do something with them.
Goes back to what you hit on with um, just maturity. I mean, that's one
Mhm,
of the things that I've always found interesting about studying different generations is they all get the same critiques at different stages in life.
mm,
And to me, it's been more an observation on, well, it's a stage of life you're in, when you're
mm,
just right out of university, right out of school, and you're just getting your life figured out and you have big aspirations and you think you've got all the answers to the world and you're bulletproof. I mean, I think back to my early 20s. There's things that
mhm,
I look back to then that I go, man, if I knew what I knew now, I never would have done. But that was part of the maturing stage and
mhm,
you go through it. But going back to it, I had really good people in my life who were there alongside me, who had already walked that road that let me go out so far on a leash, but then if I went too far, they kind of pulled me back and went, hey, like, let me give you a little bit of guidance and wisdom that if you do that too much, you're going to get burned. And here's maybe a more productive way to think about it. And I'm so glad
Oh,
that I had that, because it
yeah.
helps me go, oh, okay, thanks. Like, I'm really glad. And there were times that I just said, screw that. I'm not going to
Mhm.
listen to it. And I mean, I got dragged out of class by federal agents because I was like, what do you know? Like, I'm
Mhm.
17. I know what I'm doing here. And then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess maybe I should have listened to that wisdom.
No. Oh, okay. So let's go down this tangent because that's very interesting. So 100% agree. I think that human behavior is I think Gen Z behavior is not unique. I think that all
No.
generations have had this, propensity to complain about the state of the world and think that their generation is going to be the last. I think the difference with Gen Z is what we touched on. They have social media. So they can
Yep.
broadcast this existential angst, to billions of people, and that's all compounded, right? And then you add in the layers of likes, comments, shares, you have the feedback mechanism, the audience capture. So me being a, random Gen Z, I could, you know, post about the climate, going out in 2050. The entire world is going to be on fire in 2050. And if that gets enough likes, shares, retweets, all of that, then I've built
Then
an
that's
entire
what's
social
discipling
media
you. I
brand.
mean, that's
Right.
honestly what's coaching you, is it's
Right.
saying, hey, you did this.
Yep.
Here's all the feedback mechanisms that tell you you did a good thing,
Uh-huh.
because see, all this stuff told you it's a good thing,
Hmm.
which then just forms you in a way that makes you go, oh, okay, so doing this eccentric like stuff and then just continuing to chase that is the right path to take.
Hmm. And we also have to think about this fact. I forget the source. I apologize, but I'll send it to you just in case your audience is interested. The average Gen Z doesn't want to spend 15 minutes fact checking uh, what they consumed on social media, whether it's
Yeah.
fake or not, and that is quite concerning because if you're scrolling constantly and you're taking things in about politics, the economy, technology, the world in general, how are you not qualifying this information? And if you don't, and everything, now we're in the space of deep fakes, we're in the space of AI generated news articles with, the hallucination problem is very rampant.
Yep.
Now we're entering a world where the infosphere is not just polluted, but it's corrupted beyond belief.
Yep.
And then you think about the Gen Z's reluctance to look things up and research and gain a critical understanding. What are we gonna what's gonna happen to their minds if everything they consume on a daily, hourly, minute to minute basis is not based in reality? What kind of
Yeah.
what kind of human do you become if everything that you have circulating in your mind is not real?
Well, and I think the frightening part about that one is going back to, I look back on my life on how I got through some of these things, was I had people who were wise and discerning that helped me get through it.
Mhm.
They were there when I made the mistakes and went, all right, here's what you did. Like, this is what you do differently. I'm actually concerned that the older generations aren't handling this very well either.
Mm.
Because while it's quick to point the fingers at, well, and I dealt with this in the learning industry where it was like, oh, this was BS anyway, but it was like, oh, people have the attention span of a goldfish now. And I'm like, you know what? That's, people have never really wanted to pay attention to things they don't care about.
Yep.
And that's always a problem. People will sit through a movie they love, but if it's not entertaining or interesting or whatever, they'll tune out the second it happens. And that's not unique to Gen Z.
Mhm.
And in some ways, I actually see the older generations falling prey to some of these practices you described of consuming fake information and actually buying into it because they don't understand how the technology has changed. So they don't
Yep.
even understand the fact that, hey, just because somebody's an author now does not mean they are a qualified
Mhm.
person on a topic, because they could have had AI write a book for them, had no knowledge to even fact check the thing, and published it on Amazon. But because you're still in the mindset framework that a book makes it a qualified source through an institution, all these other things, and it's like, that's not true anymore.
Yeah.
Or, well, I subscribe to this news source, and it's like, that news source is entertainment, and it's just fueling your, personal biases already. So I think that's the part that's concerning to me, is I don't see my generation and the generations older than me necessarily stepping into recognizing they're in the fishbowl, so that they
Mhm.
can disciple and coach a younger generation to go, hey, these are the things you got. We're, in many ways, we're all learning together. And I think that's probably one of the most concerning parts I have about the stage we're in human history, is we don't necessarily have a playbook to follow in some of
Mhm.
these things.
That is interesting. It never occurred to me that older folks think that they're immune to the effects of technology too. From my perspective, Gen Z are more susceptible to these, grievances of technology. But 100%, I think that older folks definitely need to build their awareness and their competence in how technology is controlling them. Because we all have Facebook aunties, Facebook uncles that just write random stuff and send us random stuff about flat Earth and all of that. You know, but
I mean,
recognizing.
I was listening to on Diary of a CEO, Yuval Noah Harari was on there, and I
Mhm,
did a response to it because Stephen Bartlett asked him, do you think AI will take our free will?
mhm,
Which, again, kind of one of those, like, like, boom, like, let's see if we can. And I thought his response was really wise, in that he said, regardless of your views on free will, we need to be aware that believing you are not influenced by the environment around you is actually what makes you vulnerable.
mhm,
Like, if you think you are completely autonomously making decisions absent of any influence from outside sources, that actually puts you in the most vulnerable state. And I think in some ways that's exactly what I'm talking about the concern, where it's like, yeah, those Gen Zers, they're being duped by social media and they're falling for all this stuff. And it's like, uh, a simple Google search would show that the thing you just tried to convince me of is completely made up.
mhm.
But you don't believe that because you heard it from this source. Because again, you don't have the digital acumen to know how all this technology works and how information can be manufactured faster than, the institutions that I think the older generations were able to trust in many regards have vaporized, and not everybody's aware of how society as a whole has changed.
So then, Christopher, I'll pose you a question. Who
Sure.
builds this course for competency? Because you need the digital competency in
We
order to
do.
teach digital competency, but how do you acquire it and who builds that?
This is where I think we actually need a cross-generational team. You know what? We'll start it. There you go. We'll
There we
start
go.
it, Ayush, because
Yeah.
I actually think we need a cross-generational group of people who have
Mhm,
taken the time to understand all of this. You need the group of people who have the historical understanding of things, have some of that context, but you also need the younger generation that's coming up going, I hear you, and this is actually how, social interaction happens now in the new age. So then how do we build that mix of things? And that's where I actually think, instead of the pitting back and forth and going, boomers suck, Gen Z sucks, like, instead of all this, we actually need to come together and go, we are in a really messy state right now. And unfortunately, we all have bits of the puzzle, but none of us have the whole puzzle. And we
mhm.
actually need to work together to bring our pieces together and reassemble what the future looks like, and actually build that pathway. Because if we don't, right now it's a lot of the blind leading the blind, and we all can see one piece, but we can't see the rest of it.
How do you factor in, the advances in technology? Because the way I interact with my friends on a phone is going to be very different to the way I interact with them on the Apple Vision Pro, for example, which is going to be very different from the way I interact with them when I have Neuralink installed. So how do we create that course and then dynamically update it as technology and culture progress and further intertwine?
Wait, whose podcast are you on? You're asking
Sorry,
me
sorry. It's
questions?
just it's fun to ask.
No. So I think what's interesting in my years of studying and observing human behavior,
Mhm.
I think there's actually a lot more consistent than there is different. So there's differences. When I think about the differences between how we interact on a phone versus, when I go into my Quest Pro and, am messing around in the metaverse versus when I'm doing something else, there are distinct differences, absolutely. But underneath it, there are psychological and behavioral consistencies that I actually see run across all of them. And I think that's where, if we can actually deconstruct these things down to their fundamental pieces, we can help people understand what's fundamentally underneath these, so that then when we rebuild and we go, okay, something new came out. And this was something I did when XR really started taking off. I was like, this is going, and actually AI was one, because all of a sudden people were building relationships with an AI bot. And I was like, if you don't understand the mechanisms of human relationships and intimacy, you're going to really hurt yourself, because you're
Mhm.
playing with a nuclear warhead and you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
And if we can deconstruct these things and actually go, these are the different components, I actually think that cross-functional team could then come forward and say, here are the considerations that we need to think about as we start exploring these things. And I actually think, like I said, I think there's a lot more similar than there is different.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely think that the cross generational team would be a great start. But we also have this thing called big tech, and they don't really want anybody interfering with our time on site, their ability to hold our attention span. And so I think there needs to be a rewrite on how technology can control us, not just how technology is controlling us, but how far should we allow companies and corporations with millions of dollars to pay neuroscientists and data scientists to addict us on their platform. I think we need to have that conversation as well. Just like, you know, big tobacco was, you know, it- like we all knew that big tobacco was bad for us eventually, and we did
Right.
something
That
about it.
Joe Camel was literally trying to get our kids to smoke for the rest of their lives.
And we don't want to grandfather in technology the way that we've grandfathered in alcohol, where the best place to be at 5 p.m. on a Friday and Saturday is at a bar. The most romantic thing to get when you are on a date is a glass of wine. The most important thing to drink when you're celebrating something is champagne. We don't want to grandfather in technology in that way, because then we can't extract it out. It becomes very sticky to get out of our daily lives.
Well, and what's interesting? I don't know if you've been following the big tech and the government kind of head to head that's going on right now in the US. Um, but I watch it sometimes and go, this isn't getting us anywhere in some ways, because I understand what's trying to be done, which is something you're describing. Like, there's greater accountability on these tech companies, which in my opinion has been lacking for a long time. There's no accountability for the impact that they're having. And I get accountability is complicated. You can't just say, well, you built it, so it's all your fault. It's like, well, no. But at the same time, you've built something inherently designed to do all these things. How can there be no accountability that you're doing this, and then when it happens you go, whoa, not our problem? But as I look at some of the conversations, that cross-functional team of wise, discerning people is not who's actually trying to do it, and it actually ends up going nowhere. Because I don't know, if you look at some of the questions they ask, you're like, you're
Yeah.
never going to get to accountability if that's what you're asking, because you don't even know what questions to ask to hold them accountable to.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I don't want to seem like I'm suggesting that big tech is sinister and has our wants to hack us and mind control us. Maybe there are aspects of that, but I
I
think
mean, there's definitely a bend towards it. I mean, society and history tells us that money and
sure,
all this other stuff drives this stuff.
sure. But there's definitely a power play, 100%. I think we can all accept that. But I think a good example is what Tristan Harris said. So there are these things called beautification filters on social media uh,
Yep.
applications. So basically, you hold your phone up and then you can swipe filters. Everybody's used a filter before. The dog filter is, the last one I think I used in like 2016 because I don't use Snapchat anymore. But anyway, those filters have beautification kind of toggles. So the more that you use a filter, or sorry, let me rephrase, you will look different and more beautiful as you use those filters, obviously. But what's happening now is a kind of race to the bottom where TikTok increases their beautification filter by 3%, which makes you stay on TikTok because you look better on TikTok.
On
But now
TikTok.
Snapchat and Instagram all have to change that beautification filter to 5% to bring you back. They can't change it to 2% or 3%. They need to make you look better on their platform. And so then
Right.
TikTok has to increase to 8%, 20%. And then you find this it's not an explanation, but it is a factor in what is going on in terms of the attention spans on social media sites. And it's not just filters; it's
No, but that's actually a
consumption.
really good example because even
It's
that
yeah,
example, who is guiding and coaching and discipling the people through the effects
mhm.
that this is having on you psychologically? Because this is having a real effect. Because the reality is, you can put as many filters on yourself as you want. That's not how you look.
Oh yeah,
And
and
so
then you
it
get to
messes with your
this.
psyche because all of a sudden, I
Yes,
mean, it just messes with the foundational component of your identity, what you define
yeah,
beauty as, how you feel about yourself. I mean, these things are serious. Like just going, well,
oh
we
yeah.
just tune our beautification filter up 2% can dynamically change the fabric of society.
Mhm. You change the filter by 2% on Snapchat, and then you have things like Snapchat dysmorphia. I think it is like people are literally getting plastic surgery and surgery in general to change their bodies to look like the Snapchat filters. You have this dating app psychology now where we're kind of getting away from the point, but I think it's important to touch on as well
No,
for
I think it
Gen Z in
is.
particular. You have this dating app psychology where your entire qualification of a person is not based on their personality type, but the way they look and three sentences on their bio.
Yep.
It's so superficial. And then you also have um, this trait, not trait, but this reality where you're not interested in settling down anymore because the next person that you swipe on could be the one. And so you
Right.
always have this anxiety of, okay, I'm on this date, I'm with this person, it's going well, but if I just swipe a couple more times, what if I meet someone better? And you have this hollowness to the relationship. Not to mention this um, pseudo access to people where you think that everybody on the dating app is accessible, and so you don't want to settle down.
Right.
And this growing up, sorry, growing up with this as a young adult is
Well, yeah, because
just the
that's
most.
the world you
Oh
lived
my
in. Because again,
gosh.
I'm
Yeah.
a crossbreed on the end of the millennial spectrum. And my wife and I met on a dating app. And I even think about how dating apps worked
Hmm.
when it was very different. I mean, it
Yep.
was 6 hours to fill out a profile. You know, it was like it was a massive on take. You were paying serious cash every month to participate. I mean,
Yep.
it was really a commitment, and there was some accountability that went alongside with this. And even that, I think, just started a trend. And so now thinking about the next generation, what you just described, I think there's probably a lot of people that have not put time and thought into that is the fishbowl
Hmm.
that your generation and the younger generations are growing up in.
Hmm. Yeah, and it has dire effects on self-esteem, confidence. It has dire effects on dating in general, obviously. I don't know if it's appropriate to touch on the sex talk or the pornography talk on this podcast. You can say yes or no.
It depends on how far we're going to go with it.
Sure.
Because I do
Um,
think there's some real risks as we think about where artificial intelligence is going and our
mhm.
ability to speak into existence
Right. I'm not even going there.
whatever's in our head. Yeah.
I'm going a couple steps
Okay.
back.
Okay.
Um, so I'll keep it as vanilla as I can during
Okay.
this on this topic. But most of the not safe for work content, and I believe by most I mean 88%, and I have that statistic.
I was like, that's a very
Yeah.
specific statistic. That's coming from something.
88% of the top rated not safe for work content is prone to showing aggression towards women.
Okay.
And when we think that a lot of young adults, their first intimate experience is not with a physical person, but with themselves using technology
Yeah.
on a not safe for work platform. And their first experiences with this intimate platform are shown to be housed in aggression, doused
Yeah.
in aggression. I think we need to really think about what's going to happen when these folks who are consuming this free, infinite pool of not safe for work media daily, what happens when they do have their first physical encounter with a partner, in this case, female, what is going to happen? And
Yeah.
this is again, like, we are not critically thinking about what is going
No.
on. And this is again, it speaks to the broader point of we need to be talking with kids and young adults about their use of technology. It cannot be free and infinite. Because if it's
No.
free, you're the customer, and if it's infinite, it's finite in a certain way.
Yep.
And again, we need to be talking to particularly men about this propensity to consume as much not safe for work media as possible,
Yeah.
because it is going to be having dire, dire ramifications for the way that they are going to function in society.
Well, and we're seeing the dire consequences of this on even generations that didn't grow up in this.
Mhm.
So to your point, generations that literally are bathed in this from the very
Yeah.
beginning, there's
Yeah.
no like memory of, well, it was like this and now this layered on top, which still has an effect. But if that's the only world you've existed in, and I
Mhm.
agree with you that, to me, this is one of the things where, and everything you just talked about and everything we've talked about at this time, underneath all that, the wisdom of, hey, these are the things that you need to be mindful of. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns I have about technology. Even when I think about where Neuralink is going and AI is going, we continue to feed and breed a generation of people who anything you want is okay. And
Yep.
it's the goal
Yeah.
is to get it to you as fast
Yes.
and furious as possible. You should never be told no. And anytime you are told no, that is something to be destroyed. Anyone or anything that's telling you no, or any boundary that you're given, should be destroyed.
Mhm.
That propensity that technology is driving on a scale that I don't even
Oh
think
yeah.
we've begun to see the fallout and
Yeah.
implications of creating an environment where that's what people believe. Because the thing is, I don't know about you, but I know myself well enough to know if you gave me everything I wanted, I would become a psychopath.
Oh yeah.
Like if you truly just gave me whatever I wanted on demand at any point, I would become a raging psychopath. And I
Mhm.
like, so to think that we can do that to people and, oh, what's the harm that'll make them happy? It's not going to make them happy.
Yeah, no, we have given Gen Z free access and infinite access to personalized reality. And within that, there is psychopathy for sure. There's also a lot of narcissism. And
Yeah.
this is shown because, the top job that Gen Z wants to go to is being an influencer. So basically, for those that don't know, or if it's just speaking from a Gen Z perspective, being an influencer is living and doing whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, and expecting to get paid. And
Yeah.
frankly, there are a lot of people that are getting paid a lot of money to just simply exist.
Yeah.
And this is this is what Gen Z want to do. They just want to wake up and check their bank account, everything's good. They want to go
Right.
and film
Seven figures
themselves.
rolling in, and all I'm doing is eating cereal and doing whatever the heck I want to do every single day.
And you think about why? Like, what kind of quality of life is this? And it's exacerbated by social media because we are giving so much time, money, and attention to people like this. And we're not telling our kids, and frankly, Gen Z are not interacting amongst themselves and telling each other this as well. But we're not saying we have tools, free and infinite, to change the world, to improve the world. Let's do something with it. And
Right.
this is the psychology that we need to build in both generations. It needs to be, speaking to the cross generational team, this is what they need to start, you know, giving to folks. There needs to be some blueprint for a better future. And it starts, like, I guess, with the cross generational team, but it
Yeah.
boggles my mind to think about how many Gen Z are missing the point of life altogether.
So I'm actually really curious on this for you. What is the response? Because obviously you are Gen Z
Mhm.
and you're going out and having what I would consider is probably an unpopular conversation. So if a generation, their number one aspiration is, I want to just exist and get paid a whole lot of money for breathing and going through my day.
Yeah.
And you're coming out going, that's, I get you may think that. You actually don't want that. Like that will
Yeah.
be to your doom. What is the response? How do people react to that?
Um,
Is
most
it met with resistance? Is there, because that's where I look at it sometimes and go, is there hope? Like, are there enough people out there that go, I something about what you're saying is resonating and I want more of that? Or is it, you're nuts because you're in that generational gap in the life and where you make a lot of mistakes and you don't realize it until you're out of that stage.
it's not met with resistance per se. It's unfortunately met with acceptance. And I'll give you an
Okay.
example. So I did a talk in Boston on my book back in 2022. And I asked the class of about 40 people, I asked them, how many of you think you'll be automated in your lifetime? And 60% raised their hands. And it was the first time that I've ever just paused and lost focus in public speaking because I looked at the class and I was thinking, you guys live in Boston and you guys are in business school. Like, how are 60% of you going to be automated? And how have you just accepted this? You guys are between 18 and 22. Like, if you're 70 and you've just retired, it's like, sure, you know,
Right.
maybe,
But you're in the
but
prime of you're in the prime of your life at the peak of
you haven't even
potential and
started
you're
your
going,
life.
yeah, basically I know I'm going to
And
be replaced by a robot and I don't care.
and then on the flip side is that whenever I'm talking to folks, even in Montreal, and I talk to them about artificial intelligence and automation and what are you doing to secure your employment? How are you upskilling and reskilling? What are you doing in terms of generative AI? The response is just non-existent. They're unaware. They've never interacted with this idea that they could be replaced. And if they have interacted with this idea that they could be automated, it's far down in the future of, oh, it's going to happen far down the line, I have time. Or they have this naive understanding of artificial intelligence, and they're just like, it'll never take my job. And I'm like, you're a customer support representative. Like, we've already replaced that. A startup CEO in India replaced 90% of his staff, 23 people, with a chatbot. Like, it's already happened.
So do you think in some ways, because as I think about this part of the anybody watching and listening might be like, this got dark. But I mean, the
Sorry.
thing is,
Sorry.
no, but the thing is, this is the reality we're living in. And the thing
Mhm.
with it is, I actually really like having conversations like this because there's a tendency to want to deny or just avoid these kind of conversations. And actually, what we need to do more than ever right now is lean into them and go, so what can we do about it? But as we were talking through this, I was like, in some ways, based on what you just described and the data you had from these conversations, it actually doesn't surprise me that influencer is the number one job that people aspire to have in the younger generations. Because if you look at it, you're like, well,
Let me just interrupt you
what
just
else
very
is there?
quickly.
Yeah,
Just
go
very
ahead.
quickly. Because
Yeah.
influencers are also being replaced by artificial intelligence. There's an AI
Well,
generated
true.
Instagram model named Aitana, I believe, and the company
Are you
gets
kidding?
$11,000 a month from her images. There's also Lil Michaela if you want to search her up as well. So even influencers who
Are being
do
replaced
are being
by
replaced because these influencers are so difficult to work with. You know, you have to pay for their hotel, their flights, you have to deal with their personality. And frankly, let's be honest, influencers could get acne, they could, not
right.
conform to the thing or the fashion specifications or whatever. So just
I
building an
mean, they get
AI model,
older. I
AI
mean,
model
life
literally.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah,
Life
wrinkles and
happens.
everything, And so even influencers are susceptible, increasingly susceptible to being automated away. So I just wanted
But
to just
I guess
just drop that
I
in.
think and that's
Yeah.
probably something that most people's heads just went because again, if you really think about it, when and this goes back to the core psychology of it. In many regards, what people are getting from most influencers is robotic and mechanical. So it also makes sense that, well, why wouldn't you have an AI influencer? Because really all people want a lot of times from influencers is something to compare themselves to, something to aspire, it's just meaningless fluff. And so a lot of times it's like, well, why wouldn't you automate that if you can reduce all the noise and do it at a cheaper cost? Because, like you said, an influencer's nightmare. But it does make me wonder if, because most people probably haven't even thought that far ahead, that may be contributing to, well, maybe I'll just be an influencer because everything else is going to get automated. So maybe if I can figure out how to make a living existing on social media, that's a path. I don't know. I mean, again, this is me just kind of speculating on how humans think when they feel like I just have no hope, so I might as well just relinquish myself to it.
Yeah. And it's
I still
it's
can't believe
understandable.
that there are automated influencers
Oh
that
yeah.
we've created AI just it's not even real.
It's not real, and it's it's not real in the sense of the models are not real, but the ramifications and consequences in daily
Sure.
life are, almost instantaneous. It's understandable if you're not able to be monetized by other folks, you'll try to monetize yourself. But there's a lot of delusion, and again, the psychopathy and narcissism plays into this fact where you're not going to post secondary because you want to be an influencer. The average influencer is $10,000 in debt trying to emulate the lives of all of these rich folks. And by rich folks, I mean literally, because most of the world leading influencers are wealthy, were wealthy before they got
Right.
famous and became an influencer. And so it's like, again, and I'll be a Gen Z complaining, but there is no simple path forward. We all have
No.
to innovate our future, and we all have to build these cross-generational teams to innovate that future because we need the youth and the tenacity of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. which is the generation after
Yep.
Gen Z.
Yep.
And we need the wisdom and experience of Gen X and baby boomers and the millennials. There can't be infighting. We see
No,
political
we
infighting
can't.
all the time, and it doesn't work. We need
No.
to be resilient and frankly anti-fragile to all of these shocks from from technology.
Yeah. Well, and I think, not only thinking about this on a how do we mitigate some of the risks on the technology scale, but like again, before we started recording, I was talking about, just kind of the season we're in the US with politics. And I see this everywhere where the inroad fighting, the infighting,
Mhm.
instead of working together and going, listen, we all have a piece of the puzzle. If we could work together to reassemble a better puzzle,
Mhm.
we're all going to be better off than if we just take our little chunk of the puzzle and go off and try and live on an island and
Yeah.
isolate ourselves and surround ourselves with other people who have the same piece of the puzzle and go, we're just going to force a puzzle to work. And it's like, this is not going well. And at some point, we're going to need to accept that it's not going well and say, so what are we going to do about it? And it's going to mean working with people who look, think, and act differently than we do on common goals.
Mhm. We have free and infinite access to everybody. And this is the thing is that if we go through and extract everything that we've been saying, these are all positives. We have free and
Right.
infinite access to everyone. We have ubiquitous and democratic access to all information and resources. We can use these things for,
Right.
to benefit our civilization. Like people are complaining and worried that this democratic access of artificial intelligence collapses the distance between a question and an answer. So if I want to create, some synthetic biological virus, I can curate ChatGPT or curate an LLM to answer that question. But in the same breath, and I'm being very loose in my speech
No,
here, but in the same breath, you can curate an answer to climate change, right? Just
exactly.
giving folks this, you know, mental reconfiguration of let's not think that the world is going to end. Just like
No.
if you go around and you think that everybody's against you, the world sucks, we're all going to die soon. You're not going to be healthy. You're
You're
not
not
going to
inspired to
you're not
push
inspired.
forward.
But if you
No.
look around the city and you think, oh, look at all these people hustling and bustling, doing their own thing, they're all happy, they're all on their own path, they're all trying to figure it out for themselves, that inspires you. That
Yeah.
gives you something to work towards and work for. And then just
Yeah.
abstracting that, applying it to the generation, and then giving them these first principles and this technology. We don't know what can happen because again, we've never been in this situation. We have to
No.
impute. It's unprecedented, and that can be a good thing.
Yeah. And man, I feel like we could do a Rogan-esque style 3.5 hour podcast on this topic. But I think as we wrap on this,
Yep.
what you just described there for me is the hope and inspiration and it sounds like you are as well, are trying to inspire in others about this moment we're in.
Mhm.
Because yeah, it is very easy to navel gaze and look at everything that's wrong and want to throw your hands up in the air and just allow the environment we're in to suffocate you. But that same environment that can suffocate you can also be the rocket fuel that propels you to, like like you said, yeah, sure, could you make a, biological weapon? Well, you could, or you could also choose to solve world hunger or
Mhm.
provide like you could use this in ways to clean like whatever it is, you could use it for whatever it is that you want to do. And I think that's where working together towards these better goals instead of just ruminating on how awful it could be or allowing or just idly sitting by. Again, I think at the 60% of people are like, well, I'm going to be automated anyway. To me, that's just disappointing. And I think we have a lot of work to do to inspire people to move forward.
Yeah. No, we have to put the responsibility on all generations. I think that
Yeah.
parents and older siblings need to start looking at youth and giving them, difficult but necessary talks. And I think that youth needs to take responsibility and say, look, apart from wisdom and experience, I have access to whatever I want. And so let me do something with that. There is no excuse anymore. And
Right.
I don't say that in like a cynical way. I say that in, an empowering way. It's like you can
Yeah.
be successful. You can
Yeah.
make your mark on history. You just have to believe you can do that. And then you have to have the determination and motivation to do that.
Well, I don't know that I could close us on a better note than that. So I use this honestly, because if I start going again, I'm going to have to cancel my meetings and just
Yeah.
continue the conversation. But like I said, I always truly enjoy our conversations. And I hope people, again, have stuck through this whole thing to think through some of the complexity and the challenge that we have ahead while yet being inspired to do something different. Because to your point, we have the resources and there is no excuse. You can complain about things or you can actually get out and do something, but it's not about getting out and doing it on your own. It's about actually teaming up with others to do it. So maybe we'll figure out how to do that in one way and then inspire others to do the same. So thanks so much for making the time, man.
Thank you for having me, Chris. And thank you for being someone that can wrestle and struggle with ideas with me and who's open to interacting with difficult but necessary ideas and understandings for the benefit of everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody who watched or listened. Again, I hope this challenged and inspired you to make for a better future. So, with that, we will be back next week. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you on the other side.